Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works. And we're at the clutter zone. And we're working on this, the Mi-4 Hound by HobbyBoss in 1/72 scale. This is part 3. Don't know if we're going to complete it in part 3, but we'll see what happens. And here we are. As you can see, we've got the fuselage basically assembled. We've got all the glazing in place. The doors are basically assembled. We're at the point now where we've got it painted. Can't really do much more assembly until we get it painted. Now, the first thing we have to worry about is masking our glazing. And as I mentioned before, when I glued the windows in place, I made sure I glued them in using plastic model cement because, of course, they go in from the inside, so it's not like you can add them later. So the last thing you want to do is to be masking these and have a window pop inside and then, oh crap, you're really screwed. The main windscreen here, there's two ways we can go about this. We can carefully cut masking tape to cover these windows. And I've done that before, and it certainly is appropriate here. But for these other windows, if you were to put a piece of masking tape on there and then try to cut it, odds are you'd have to put so much pressure on the window that you would pop it inside, and then once again, you'd have no window there. So what I'm going to be using is, and there's different products available, but I'm going to be using is the Humbrol Mascol here. And I've had good results with this before. You could also try using, let's see here, Micro Mask by Microscale. And the reason I'm going to be going with the Humbrol is the last time I used the Microscale masking solution, it was really, really hard to get off. Whereas I've had pretty good results with the Humbrol product. So I went out and I bought myself a new bottle because my old one, it went solid a long time ago. So basically what you do when you're using this is anything you don't want to have painted, basically airbrushed, you just paint that on. And it goes on kind of basically the color you see here, and then it goes almost clear. When it's time to remove it, you just take a fingernail and you just scrape it, and usually you can pop it right off. And another advantage of Mascol is you can actually temporarily glue things in place, and that's one of the things we're going to do, is we're going to be gluing our clamshells in place with the Mascol, and then we'll just pop them apart later. So there's the product wet, and there is the Mascol dry on that rear window. You can see it barely shows. And in this shot we can see that the Mascol has been applied to all of our transparencies. And as well, the door that I said I was going to be just tacking in place, that's actually glued in place using the Mascol. Same thing for our clamshell doors. They've just had a bead of Mascol put all the way around and then just jammed in place. And they'll pop off really easy when the time comes. Now, it's time to decide how we're going to paint this. Geez, I don't know. Should I go with the Russian Air Force, which is green over blue, or the Chinese Air Force, which is green over blue? I'm kind of leaning towards, let's be correct here, the Soviet Air Force here. I'm kind of leaning towards this. The color for the blue is Model Master 1722. That actually is duck egg blue. Isn't that just special? So that's what we're going to be painting the underside of our Hound, is duck egg blue. Let's head over to the spray booth. The Hound is now back for paint, at least in terms of our duck egg blue. So next thing we want to do is we want to mask off the bottom so that we can do the green on the top. Now, I'm going to use a combination of masking tape, basically the masking tape for the straight lines, and then I'm going to use my Humbrol Mascol for any of the curved lines. And that should get things masked up pretty quick. There's the start to our tail boom masking. And I think what I might do just for the underside of these two little stabilizers, I think I just might throw a little bit of Mascol on that. And that'll be a whole lot less disruptive than trying to cut a piece of tape for it. Alright, minor disaster here. While I was putting the masking on, I dropped the darn thing, and it landed on the crossbar of the stool I'm using, right there. So you can see there's the fracture, and it goes right down through the middle of the windscreen. So I think painting is going to have to take a bit of a back door for a bit here until I can do something about this transparency. But you can see that's a nasty crack going all the way down. Wow, that's nasty. I think I'll just go off and cry for a few minutes. Well, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get rid of those cracks, but at least I have gotten all of the top area here glued together and filed and cleaned up. Hopefully, at worst, it'll look like a windscreen panel that has cracked. You know, maybe it's taken a bullet at some point, and they haven't got around to fixing it yet. Oh well, not every model can be 100% perfect. The underside has mostly been masked. All I have to do now is this curve right here and on the other side, and I'm actually going to use Mascol to do that. And there's our masking done. As you can see, the Mascol has been reapplied to the windscreens, even the cracked one, and the stabilizers, and we're ready for some green paint. Alright, so we've got our green paint on, and now it's time to take the masking off. Not of the windows, but of all of the light blue areas. Alright, so that turned out pretty good. A little bit of roughness here, but I can touch that up. The main thing is we've got our colors on, so we can give it a shot of gloss coat and get the decals on. Isn't that pretty? All nice and shiny and ready for decals. Now, here's the decal sheet. I don't remember if I had already shown this, but we're only going to need about half of these decals. But already I can tell I'm going to be most of the day putting these on. It's just, I don't know. I guess I'm going to have to go without sleep today to get all these on. Well, better start. Well, it took many hours over several days, but I finally got all these decals on. Certainly one of the more challenging models I've ever had to decal. I almost got that out without laughing. At any rate, one thing I would like to draw your attention to is the clamshell doors. There is a red star that goes on them, and the top of the star is on the fuselage, and most of the star is down here on the actual door. So you might want to cut that in advance as opposed to throwing it in the water and then realizing that you've got to cut it like I did. So the dull coat is finished, or rather I should say the Tamiya flat finish is dry, because dull coat, of course, it's a tester's product. So I'm going to peel away all of our masking on our transparencies and things, because that's the sort of thing you want to get done before you start putting the fiddly bits on, stuff like that. There, the Mascol came off fairly cleanly. I don't really have any complaints about it. And of course we have our unfortunately damaged window panel there. Not much I can do about that, although one of my kids did say, maybe you could put some little tiny blood splatters on the inside of the cockpit and say, the co-pilot got plugged. Kind of gruesome, but I suppose plausible. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this door is going to be mounted in the open position so that we can see inside the cockpit. So I've got the landing gear legs on. I still have to paint them. This is as good a time as ever to point out that we have a tail sitter. Now, I was anticipating that this could be a problem, and that's another reason to have left the gunner's gondola off. So I should be able to put some sort of weight in that front area. And a problem I didn't anticipate that I should have is if we look, you can see right through the grills through to the other side. Now that should be full of engine-y type stuff. There's a little bit of a snafu on my part. Using the hole where the ventral gondola is going to be, I added a couple of small nuts, and I just tossed them into the inside of the engine compartment, and then I ran a bunch of white glue up in there, and that appears to have fixed our tail sitting problem. I decided to give the blades a little bit of droop. The one on the top you can see I've already pre-bent. The one on the bottom I haven't done anything with yet. I think it just looks a little more realistic when there's some weight to the rotor blades, because after all, when we display our helicopters, they're basically at rest. There's been more than a couple of small disasters with this model. The latest one is after assembling the rotor head, I picked up the rotor head. Oh, and here's another blade that is basically coming loose. I don't know if it's a flaw, but there's a little round peg that comes off that the rotor blade actually slides onto. And this one snapped off as I picked up the rotor blade, and this one right here is just about to let go. Now, as I just mentioned about things going wrong, one of the other things that's gone wrong with our rotor head is there is, I believe the part is called a swash plate, and it normally resides on the shaft and has these arms that go out to these rods. And George, the part-eating carpet monster, already ate that part. So what I've done is I've put this tube on here, and that'll help to hold our rotors in place, because I can't glue them on. Not without the rotors being fixed, and then what would happen is every time you touch the model, you'd break off the rotor blades. But at any rate, if we look carefully here, you can hopefully see that I've done a little bit of filing there. So I'm going to put a piece of styrene underneath, and it will help to hold the two that have already broken off in place. And then what I'll do is I'll put a piece of plastic going from here to that tube, and that will represent the arms that normally come out from the swash plate to control the pitch of the blades. And hopefully we can get this back to looking close to the way it should. Here is the repairs that I've made to my rotor head. You can see that I've glued a piece of styrene to the underside of the hub, and then that gave me a lot more gluing surface instead of just relying on basically butt ending the rotor blade onto the hub. Now, I could have also drilled a very small hole in both parts and inserted a brass rod, and I probably would have done that if I had had a suitable size drill kicking around and handy, but I didn't. So I ended up going with this approach. And the other thing you can see is this part here where it looks like arms coming out, and that is to represent basically the swash plate. That was the part that I dropped on the floor a few days ago, and just for comparison, I'll show you that on the instructions. That's the swash plate right there. Now, I know what I've created doesn't have all those nice little knobby details and everything, but hopefully it will serve. The main thing is there needs to be arms for those rods that come down from the rotor blades. There needs to be arms for those rods to interact with. And there's our rotor head with everything touched up with some gun metal. And hopefully it looks the part. While futzing around fixing the rotor head, I also took the opportunity to build the ventral gondola for the gunner. I'm probably not going to do any more internal painting on it than I've got here, just basically painting the gun itself, because I imagine once I get it in place it'll be pretty dark inside there. Other parts of the project I've been busy with, as you can see, is the landing gear has all been installed, and really the landing gear went together very, very well. Everything fit. There was no issues where I had to persuade anything to go in. Literally it almost clipped together and just required a little bit of glue to hold things in place. Now as well, you can see that the All the various vents on the nose of the Hound have all been given just a diluted wash of German gray, just enough so you can still see a little bit of the green, because those areas are all kind of a mesh. And of course, on the underside, we have the two exhaust pipes. And one of these is the kit part, and one of them is a replacement, because that's another thing I dropped on the floor. I had to make another one out of some scrap styrene. So even though I didn't think I was going to be scratch building anything on this, my own klutziness meant that I had to. I really am coming down to final assembly. Now, you can see these little white blocks that have glued onto the doors, and they actually correspond to the hinge locations. And I've glued enough things like this onto airplanes and helicopters and things. Anything that's an open door, if you don't have some sort of a tab, it's just never going to stay on. This is what I'm going to use to glue my doors on, and hopefully that will keep them from falling off. Ideally, this would be a little piece of L channel, but I don't have anything like that, so it's going to have to do as being a block. And then I'll give it a little bit of gray paint to camouflage it later. Okay, that was nerve-wracking. Basically, these doors are held on with regular plastic model cement on those little white blocks like I described. And then what I did is I ran a little bit of super glue along where the door touches the edge of the fuselage as well. So after that's had some time to set up, I'm just going to touch it up with a little bit of gray paint. And hopefully you won't notice that there's a little bit of a square block there. The idea is to show the doors in the open position. So there we are, it is finished. As usual, I'm going to make my normal excuse. I was planning on doing a little bit more weathering than I did. And I might go back and do a little bit of light weathering. As you can see, the clamshell doors are open. And basically, I don't think you'd want to be flying with the clamshells open. It seems to me that would cause an awful lot of turbulence. However, they probably could be open if the helicopter was on the ground with the engine running. But it certainly illustrates that possibly a ramp might be a better solution, although most of the Russian helicopters have gone with clamshells and removable ramps. And of course we can see my oopsie there when I dropped it and broke the windscreen. But I have seen aircraft in service, particularly helicopters, with cracks in their windscreens, because most of the time the windscreens are a plexiglass material. And just to wrap things up, of course, we have the Hound here in the middle. And then over here, we have Mill's first helicopter design, the Mi-1, the Hare. And then we have Sikorsky's S-55, which basically the Hound was designed in response to, and certainly copied the overall layout, although certainly improved on it basically by having a clamshell set of doors at the rear. And then coming a year or so later, We have Sikorsky's the Seahorse here, or the Choctaw as this version is. And even though it's a slightly later design than the Hound, I have to say I think the Hound is probably a little bit more versatile. Although the Seahorse / Choctaw certainly was used for many, many different roles. But I think it's just nice to be able to see what it looks like among its contemporaries. So, thanks for watching Dan's Model Works, and keep on modeling.